Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for providing Ionity the opportunity to present ourselves, our goal, our projects, and our roadmap to you, to all the stakeholders, not just in the region, but in Spain and above. What I would like to introduce to you is this company called Ionity. We have heard that name a couple of times this morning already, and I would like to walk you through the company, the setup, the reason why we were founded, and what our mission and our ambition is. So basically, Ionity was founded last November, almost 1 year ago. And Ionity is a joint venture of 4 car manufacturers, which is Volkswagen, represented by Audi and Porsche, Ford of Europe, the Daimler Group, and the BMW Group. And well, as Mr. Stöcke from Phoenix Contact mentioned, those car manufacturers just a couple of minutes ago, and different opinions, different roadmaps they have, different development objectives they have. At least one thing unified them. They were pretty clear in the fact that they need infrastructure before they sell the vehicles. And that's something we can learn from a California-based company called Tesla. There is a very famous research which Tesla published a year ago, which showed that the sales of the Model S in areas where we had superchargers available was up to 11 times higher than in areas where the supercharger was not available. And the answer and the reason why is crystal clear. If I buy a car and I can afford to pay 100,000 euros for buying that car, and this can have supercharger capabilities, I also want to use that technical gadget. I mean, if I buy a car with parking assistance, and the car tells me, well, you only can use parking assistance at night or between 6 and 8 a.m. or so. So if I have a technical limitation in a gadget I pay, the end customer would not have any argument or any positive buying decision. So to make that a very clear statement, this chicken and egg problem everybody in the e-mobility world was discussing for years is over. It is very clear that positive buying decisions of potential EV customers are only done if a decent infrastructure is available. Meaning, if I want to buy a car with a 50 kilowatt onboard charger, I need a 50 kilowatt charger in my neighborhood. If I buy a car with 150, 220 kilowatt chargers, I want to have those chargers in place at the moment where I do the positive buying decision. Now, as you have seen in the Phoenix Contact presentation, there's 2 quite famous electric vehicles, full electric vehicles, which will come to the market within the next 6 months. The first is the Audi e-tron with a capability of 150 kilowatt, and the second is the Porsche Taycan, or formerly known as Mission E, which has a capability of 220 kilowatt. Now, we already know, as we are a child of 4 car manufacturers, that within the next 2 years, there will be vehicles available on the market which can charge with 350 kilowatt. Now, we are, and that's a bit different than what Mr. Stöcke said, yes, we know that we are deploying infrastructure at the moment which no car can use. However, the first message is the infrastructure is downward compatible, so also 50 kilowatt DC cars can charge on those chargers. Secondly, we are calculating with the product lifetime of the chargers of 8 to 10 years. We know that in 2 years from now, there are cars coming to the market which can charge with 350 kilowatt. So do we want to have the same investment, the same effort again in 2 years and replace 2 years old chargers by the next generation of high power chargers? No, this is not the case, and that's the reason why the 4 car manufacturers decided to create a joint venture and to deploy charging infrastructure, which is a bit oversized as of today, but which will serve the needs of the EV drivers in 2-3 years from now. Now, what we can argue is that there's a lot of operators in the market, there are a lot of energy companies, a lot of very innovative operators of charging infrastructure already. So why the hell do those car manufacturers create a joint venture and do it themselves? There's 2 reasons. The first is, again, coming back to the chicken and egg problem, that the car manufacturers realized we need that infrastructure at the moment where we launch the cars. And there was a lack of willingness of a pan-European investment for high-power charging infrastructure. And pan-European really means across the European continent. We simply could not, or our shareholders simply could not find anybody who is willing to invest in a network from a network character. And the second thing is that, especially in the field of 50 kilowatt chargers, there was a lot of negative experience, what one of the first speakers this morning discussed or described, that charge point operators and energy providers provided a proprietary system. So I need well, without mentioning anybody who is attending, let's say an EDF card. I need an EDF card in France to get to my EDF chargers, but I cannot use that EDF charger with any other mobility card. So those proprietary systems were leading to a negative buying decision or a negative decision against an electric vehicle and to a lack of the ramp up of the market. And those two factors were the reason why the car manufacturers said, if nobody else can help us at the moment, at this early stage of the market, we're going to do it ourselves. And that was the birth hour of Ionity. Now, on the other side, what we realize is that we are only one small stakeholder in that whole European ecosystem. And this is the reason why our target is to deploy 400 charging stations, which is a minimum network. We are not blind, we are not stupid. We know there will be competition, especially the petrol companies will definitely enter into that market when it comes to a relatively midterm profitability forecast. Now, at the moment, it's really long-term down the road. That's the reason why we jump in. But we only see ourselves as an enabler of the market. We will not rule the market. We will not build up a monopoly situation. We only will build 400 charging stations across Europe in 25 countries. Compared to 45,000 petrol stations we have in Europe, we can say that we are just going to be a minor player in that field. However, we are stimulating the market at an early point where the car manufacturers need this stimulation, but where there is a lack of investment willingness. Now, how does that company look like and what is our ambition? To make that very clear, our ambition is to serve 5 to 10% of the charging cycles. We know that at the moment 80 to 90% of the charging cycles are done at home. That's still relevant and that's still valid. On the other side, if you look at major cities like Madrid, for instance, or Barcelona, where, let's say, 1 of 4 citizens has a dedicated parking space, we either have the opportunity to deploy thousands of AC stations on the pedestrian sites, which just looks ridiculous and is also a significant invest for 6 or 8 hours charging. Or we deploy high-power charging infrastructure at places where people are already used to charge or to fuel their cars or fill their cars with conventional fuel, which is gas stations in inner cities on strategically important points or along the highways to extend the range. And that's exactly the battlefield or the playfield or playground of Ionity. We are not entering cities. We are not determining 50 kilowatt chargers or AC chargers. We are exclusively deploying 350 kilowatt chargers along major highways in order to enable long distance travels between major cities and urban areas. We are not focusing on anything else. That's a clear mandate and obligation from our shareholders, but also from the European Commission. And I'll come to that project in one of the later slides. We've heard about that from Mr. Morsi this morning. So our clear mandate is 350 kilowatt chargers, 400 locations in 25 countries, only between urban areas to enable range extension or long range distance. So it's a tiny little percentage of the charging market or the charge point operators market. It's 5 to 10%. But it's similar to conventional fuel. I mean, how often do you really stop on the highway and pay 30 to 40% more for your gasoline than in your gas station in the neighborhood? But you use it, you frequently use it, even if it's just for one trip per month or whatever, those charging stations will be used and they will be frequented and they are necessary in order to stimulate EV sales. Now, what are we talking about? We've heard a lot about technology today. We have heard a lot about transformers, energy demand, distribution grid, peak loads, also limitation. A typical Ionity charging park, again, we are not building our own charging stations. We are just buying them from the market. We do not need to invent the wheel again and again. There is reliable infrastructure available in the market. Our chargers or our locations look the same in each country. It's 6 outlets. Each of the outlets can charge with 350 kilowatts. So we've got a medium voltage grid connection with 1.25 megawatt connection or power. You see there's a simultaneous factor, meaning that we do not provide 350 kilowatt times 6 outlets maximum power. And the reason is it's extremely unlikely that 6 cars will exactly plug in at the same time and exactly have the peak load. So we know that we can use a little less than the output power. And with a energy management system on the local level, we also can manage those load curves. On the other side, what I have to highlight is, again, We need 1.25 megawatt as a minimum because a technical limitation for the end customer, especially on a petrol station on a highway, is also absolutely not acceptable. That's the reason why also in my previous life with my previous employers, we had 50 kilowatt chargers along highways. That was the beginning, Mr. Morsi, right? And it's still correct. But for long range distances, I want to get my charge as quickly as I can, and I want to leave the station, and I want to continue my trip as quickly as I can. So a technical limitation down to 50 kilowatt on the highways is also not acceptable if we have a mass market with cars who can charge up to 350 kW. That's the reason why we decided for that setup. Yeah, it's green power on each of the locations. So we have an energy procurement process which makes sure that we have, well, at the moment it's just certificate trading, as you know, but at least the amount we sell at the charging stations is generated 100% from renewable sources. We've got 24/7 access, meaning that our location partners, and we do not develop own properties, we are just having location partnerships with existing partners and existing players in that field. Again, we just see ourselves as an enabler, but we need 24/7 access. So the ultimate philosophy as an umbrella above everything you can see is that our goal is not to change the customer's behavior at all. Each of us is driving to a gas station already. Each of us is filling the car at the gas station. So why should we deploy charging infrastructure on supermarkets or in any other locations? Why should we try to change the customer's behavior if technically we have now the possibilities to deploy infrastructure and to provide the same service and almost the same speed of refilling the range, may it be electricity or fuel, doesn't matter, at locations which are used since decades. So that's the reason why our network mainly is deployed along highways on existing petrol stations in addition to existing petrol providers. To talk about our network a little bit, as I said, our mandate is to deploy charging infrastructure in 25 European countries. 13 of those 25 are part of the Europe E project, where I'm also the project manager, and Ionity is the leading or coordinating applicant. You'll see that on one of the next slides. You see a lot of, well, partnerships there and a lot of logos. You see our colleagues from NLX in Italy, where we signed a partnership with, which also underlines that we are interested in local value creation and local competency. On the other side, the cooperation between NL and Ionity also shows that at the moment, Ionity has the financial capabilities and the willingness to invest in that piece of infrastructure. Now, everybody knows that NL is a financially very wealthy company, but in this field of high-power charging infrastructure and the low utilization, we came to an agreement that it might make sense that we both help each other and we both support each other. So this is a kind of partnership which we really appreciate because it's also underlining what Mr. Morsi said. It's barrier-free, it's non-discriminating, it's with the support of the European Commission, but it's multinational, and that's really essential for us. On the other side, well, you see also that we signed the first cooperation with a petrol operator in Spain, Cepsa. Well, everybody is aware of that. Now the question is, why is there not a Repsol logo, for instance? Or why is there Shell and OMV, who are competitors, just to come back to the end customer's need and demand? And this is a statement I really clearly want to do today. The mistake we all did across Europe in the beginning of this e-mobility wave, and I was part of that, and Mr. Morsi and myself, we have a joint working history since a couple of years. We created competition before we created a market. As one of the speakers this morning said, he needs 12 RFID cards to use the infrastructure in the neighborhood. That's ridiculous. This is just absolutely not acceptable for a mass market breakthrough. So the end customer might be stimulated to join a Shell station because there's some loyalty program or some benefit points or whatever, but no petrol operator would ever think about technically limiting the customer to say you are only allowed to use our Shell stations and you are not allowed to go to OMV or to Texaco or to Total or whatever. Now in the e-mobility industry, we think that this is exactly the way we should do corporations, to limit them to an exclusivity. Why? Why should the end customer have an understanding to have exclusive partnerships, in the best case with a proprietary system, and you only are allowed to use the station with our mobility pass? In this way, we never ever will get a breakthrough of a mass market of e-mobility. Just to make that clear, this is an experience we had over the last couple of years. That's the reason While from our end customer's perspective, Ionity is not limited to any exclusive partnerships, because the end customer would not accept that, and this is the view of the automotive industry as well. However, there's more than sufficient options to positively stimulate the utilization on this or that brand. That's exactly what this network reflects. There still are some blank spots. Greece and Portugal are still our play fields where we do not have any partners yet, but all the other countries are covered to, well, roughly 80% of the network, meaning that as of today, we've got 320 out of 400 locations secured on a location-based contract. Now, this is all preparation, and this is all theory. Now, talking about reality a little bit, we started this initiative in November last year. We started Europe E last year in July, as you could hear. Given the fact that we are investing something around 250 to 300 million euros at the moment, with a support of 40 million euros of the European Commission, and again, 40 million euros taxpayers' money, we did significant work in tenders and procurement processes for construction, design, hardware. Also, our friends from Oma Zabal can hopefully agree that this tender process was really tough we had for transformer stations. But again, it's taxpayers' money, and we have the obligation and the responsibility to be sensitive with that taxpayers' money. And that's the reason why we did a lot of pre-work, and since April we start the rollout. This is the first station we opened in the western part of Germany called Brohltal. And this is a typical setup. It's an Australian supplier. At the moment, we've got two suppliers, ABB and Tritium. This is also not a secret. The reason is that both were able to provide us a liquid-cooled cable with up to 500 amps, as Mr. Stöcker from Phoenix Contact provided us. On the other side, in order to get a building permit for such a charging park, you need a CE-certified system, and not just a cable, so the entire system needed to be certified. That's the reason why part of the selection process was ABB and Tritium as a result. So this is how it looks like. Each of the outlets can provide up to 350 kilowatt. 2 weeks ago, we had the first charging session with a Porsche car, which went above 260 kW. So it is really in use, and the system is working. Just to show you some more examples, on the right-hand side, you see a picture of the station called Gotthard. That's one of the Alps highways in Switzerland. Typical setup with a medium voltage transformer, low voltage distribution, 6 outlets, power electronics, sometimes some step-up transformers depending on the grid situation. But given that we have multiple grid operators in most of the countries, we are currently dealing with more than 700 grid operators in order to get an approval and a technical validation of that system. Sorry, I think, yeah, some more impressions without going too much into detail. On the top left, you see 2 German sites, Brohltal East and West, so we cover both sides of the highway. On the right-hand side, you see a site in Denmark, which is a drive-through solution, where we also thought about trailers, lorries, bigger vans, so also cars which just need to drive by. On the left-hand side, on the bottom, you see 2 French sites, Tour-la-Vue and I think Portanger on the south of Paris. And on the right side of the bottom, you see another Swiss site. So at the moment, we have stations active in Germany, France, Switzerland, Austria, and Denmark, 2 in Norway. And what we also made clear as one of the experiences we had in our previous projects and lives is there is a lot of PowerPoint and a lot of presentations and a lot of ambitions and a lot of press releases which say, well, we are going to deploy up to 400 stations. We are going to deploy the biggest network. Well, if you Google the biggest EV network in Europe, you find 12 different press releases. Who wants to provide you the biggest network? Now, what we experience is that the end customer only trusts us if we are transparent. So on the website, first thing you see if you click on the website is a counter which says, this is our goal, this is 400 stations, this is where we are at the moment, and this is what is under construction. And under construction means if you go there and you show up and you make a picture, you see construction area. It's not planning, it's not coming soon, it's not coming in 2 years. This is under construction. So transparency is also something we want to give back to the European Commission, who is entering into that risk to say nobody knows if that system works, nobody knows if somebody is using it, but we're going to support it because we believe in e-mobility and we believe in high-power charging. So transparency is also something I can highly recommend to all of you, which is so essential in order to get the end customer's trust. This is something we discussed a lot with the hardware manufacturers. That's called the Ionity final design or target design. So also design and visibility is something which is important, of course. Well, easy access and usability, that's the reason why all our stations, in that, not just in the target design, which now is in the design freeze and in construction phase, they are equipped with a system called plug and charge. Plug and charge is one of the use cases out of the so-called ISO 15118 standard. Plug and charge means I get rid of all the RFID cards and tokens and apps. I just plug in my card. My vehicle is the identification, so the identification of me as a customer is implemented in the car. The car is automatically recognized, and the entire authentication and billing process is handled as it is now with RFID cards, but the authentication itself is done via the cable, via power line communication. That's why our colleagues from Phoenix Contact can agree that this is a painful development process, but it's needed in order to overcome all those obstacles of proprietary systems. Coming to Europe E. Mr. Morsi mentioned Europe E as one of the projects which were funded in the so-called blending call. Blending call means we've got 20% funding from the European Commission. We get a loan which is equivalent to the funding, and we have an own investment. So just to show you some figures and facts about Europe E. Europe E is currently one of the biggest EV infrastructure projects which were funded, but it's a rollout project. So we do not have any real-life trials. We are not testing the hardware. We are obliged to use hardware which is available on the market, which has decent and mature after-sales services, which is serial production. We get 20% funding, but we need to roll out. So we are going to be measured, and our payment from the European Commission is done based on the milestones we achieve. In other words, we need to perform, otherwise we do not get the funding, which ends up in not getting the loan. So we are obliged to perform, and performance and transparency is essential. So what we have is 13 member states, including Spain, are part of the Europe E project. It's 340 out of 400 stations which are under the Europe E funding. This gap between 340 and 400 is because we also deploy hardware commercially for our shareholders in Switzerland and Norway, and who are not part of the European Union. But 13 member states are part of Europe E. Ionity is the coordinator, I'm the project manager, and we have a total funding or total budget of roughly 200 million investment, where 40 million euros are funding from the European Commission. In total, if you sum that up to 400 locations, again, we are currently investing something between 260 and 300 million euros in order to get a basic network done. Again, it's nothing where we want to rule the market or we want to conquer the markets. It's just needed. We see a lack of investment capabilities, especially for a non-discriminating, barrier-free, open network with 350 kilowatt. That's the reason why the OEM jumped in and spent that money in order to stimulate the market a little bit with the support of the European Commission. And well, hopefully, if we meet each other in a year from now or 2 years from now, we will have the 400 locations installed. We are pretty confident that we can achieve that goal. Our country manager for Spain, Alex Zellmeyer, well, he's the one who has to do the job in Spain and to find locations and partnerships, but we are pretty confident that we will get the network completed by the end of next year, also with a view to the European Commission to underline that, well, the money is worth having it invested into that company. Just some breaking news. We are also commercially now starting, meaning that for the beginning we had a charging for free. Now the acceptance of EV charging in different countries is very different. In the UK, for instance, we had the experience that in the year 2018, in the beginning of this year, there was a research by the National Road Authority, and they came to the conclusion that, surprise, surprise, the end customer now in the UK would be willing to pay up to £2 for a full charge. So that would be something below 3 cents per kilowatt hour, given the 50 kilowatt cars. But they would be willing to pay that. Well, that's very good. You never would get a return on invest, especially on a high power charging area. In other countries, like in Norway, for instance, people are not questioning that it's going to cost money. The electricity even costs more than the fuel, because nobody says that e-mobility is cheaper mobility. It's just clean mobility. It's a different mobility concept, but it's not automatically cheaper. So we were faced with 25 different markets, 25 different ecosystems, 25 different requirements and customer expectations, which we all needed to bring under one umbrella, and that's the reason why we initiated a just one-time fee, like most of the other operators as well, just to start with something. You will always find advantages and disadvantages of those systems, but that was just to initiate a little bit and to start being commercially active. Because for those of you who ever operated a charging infrastructure, there's a significant difference between just providing electricity and then invoicing the electricity under the role split of charge point operators and mobility service providers, according to the European Commission or European Union infrastructure regulations. So to generate experience and to stimulate the market a little bit, we just introduced a payment of 8 euros per charge. Yeah, that's all. That's, let's say, just a slight view on what we are doing, who we are, and what our objectives are. Again, it's just about realization now. We've been talking a lot about theory and the concept. My core message today should be that we started the rollout. We are in the middle of the rollout. As of today, we have 26 construction sites which are currently under construction. The first Spanish site will come soon, hopefully. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention and for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.